keys is to do the exact opposite, to correct it, and not only to get rid of sinat chinam, baseless hatred, but to replace it and to practice ahavat chinam, baseless love, to show love and kindness and compassion and friendship and goodness to all and sundry, even people we don't know, even people who are not from our circles. We must live a life which exudes kindness and friendship and love. And this will take away, remove the cause of the destruction of the temple, and we will merit to see once again the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash HaShlishi, which we know is the building which will be built, as mentioned by God alone, will be the eternal resting place for Hashem in this world. And so we will now spend a few moments on watching this video, and afterwards Rabbi Kalbach will say some closing remarks. So if we could show the video now, please. Rabbi Masinta.
Long before the first rays of dawn are seen in the Judean mountains, pious Jews make their way towards the Western Wall in preparation for the sunrise prayer service. King David wrote, "I wake the dawn," as if to say, the dawn does not wake me. 3,000 years later, his words live in the hearts of his people. "I will not come into my house," David promised. "I will not climb into my bed. I will not give sleep to my eyes nor slumber to my eyelids until I find a place for God, a dwelling for the mighty one of Jacob." All his life, David sought to find this most sacred place and to build God's holy house in Jerusalem. For here, God would reveal his divine presence, and from here would rise the prayers of every Jew and the prayers of all mankind. It is here that Jacob had lain down to sleep and had dreamed of a ladder reaching to the heavens, and upon awakening from his dream exclaimed, "Behold, this is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven."
For nearly 2,000 years, the Holy Temple has lain in ruins. What was this place that eternally inspires the hearts of the Jewish people? That a mere outer wall surrounding the Temple Mount, a wall not even of the temple itself, should be held in such awe and treated with such abiding love? It was not simply a huge synagogue as so many people assume. The Holy Temple was a unique structure, the one house of the one God, unlike any other edifice on earth. In the final chapter of Isaiah, God speaks, "The heavens are my throne, and the earth my footstool. Where is the house that you would build for me? Where is this resting place?"
And yet they built the impossible. They built a house for God. The Holy Temple was first built by King Solomon on the site established by his father David. The Temple of Solomon stood for 410 years, then was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, who led the Jews into exile in Babylon. 70 years later, the people were gathered back into the land of Israel, and the temple was rebuilt by Ezra the scribe under the benevolent protection of King Cyrus of Persia. Again, the temple stood as the center of Jewish life, this time for 420 years, through the desecration by the Syrian Greek armies of Antiochus and the subsequent rededication by the Maccabees, through the tyrannical reign of Herod, the ex-Roman slave who ultimately became king over the Jewish people. The paranoid King Herod assassinated the sages of Israel, all but Baba Ben Buta, whose eyes he put out. Seized by terror and guilt over what he had done, he sought advice from Ben Buta as to how he could atone for his monstrous sins.
"You have extinguished the light of the world," Ben Buta told him, "and so you must rekindle the light of the world by restoring and beautifying the Holy Temple." King Cyrus had prevented the Jews from rebuilding the temple in all of its original size and elegance. But now the repentant Herod restored much of its former glory. The Talmud teaches that one who never saw the temple as rebuilt by Herod has never seen a beautiful building.
And the mystical teachings of Judaism say further that since the day the temple was destroyed, man has not seen at all. For with the destruction of the temple, the gift of sight that God gave mankind was dimmed. Seeing in its truest sense will not be possible until the Holy Temple is once and forever rebuilt.
To understand something of the extraordinary greatness of the Holy Temple, we must go back to its beginnings, its first roots in the wilderness of Sinai during the 40 years that God led the Jews through the desert after the Exodus from Egypt. A portable sanctuary called the Tabernacle was built by Moses as an atonement for the sin of the golden calf, and in fulfillment of the scriptural commandment, "They shall make for me a sanctuary so that I may dwell within them." In this sanctuary, God's divine presence was miraculously revealed. As the Bible relates, when the clouds of glory descended upon the tabernacle, this was the signal for the children of Israel to rest from their travels and make camp. Then, when it was God's will that the tribes of Israel travel again, the clouds of glory would rise and depart, signaling the Levites to disassemble the tabernacle and the children of Israel to journey on. When finally the children of Israel entered the promised land, the tabernacle accompanied them.
It stood in Gilgal for 14 years, then at Shiloh for 369 years, at Nob for 13 years, and in Gibeon for 44 years. Here is the hill at Shiloh today, thought to have been the site of the tabernacle. 430 years in all, the tabernacle wandered through the land of Israel, a princely bridegroom yearning and searching for a bride. By this time, David was king over Israel. It was intolerable to him that the divine presence should dwell in a temporary structure. David and the prophet Samuel looked deeply into the Holy Scriptures, in Deuteronomy and in the book of Joshua, and concluded that the chosen site had to be in the territory allotted to the tribe of Benjamin, in a place called Jerusalem. From the moment King Solomon built the Holy Temple and consecrated it, Jerusalem became the focal point for the soul of every Jew for all time. God no longer dwelled in a tent. The divine presence had taken up permanent residence in a great and glorious house of stone.
The portable tabernacle was built primarily of overlaid wood and stretched cloth, both originating as plant life. But the temple had to be built entirely of stone. Since this was to be the permanent dwelling place of the godly light in this physical world, the light had to permeate the world down to its lowest aspect, inanimate matter, stone. Stones of all shapes, sizes, and qualities were utilized in the construction. The largest stone known to have been used weighs more than 400 tons. The stones used for the great altar had to be hewn without the aid of an iron tool, yet had to be as smooth as polished glass. If a scratch the thickness of a fine hair were found, that stone was removed from the altar and replaced and buried beneath the temple.
An extraordinary series of miracles occurred during the building of the first temple. Throughout the 8 years of its construction, not one of the many thousands of laborers died or fell ill. But then, when the construction was completed, all the workers fell dead. And God spoke from heaven, saying that he would give them all their full reward in the next world, the eternal world. This so that the kings and rulers of other lands would not use these same workers for their own buildings and boast that those who built the house of God now work for us.
The sages of Israel report in the Mishnah that the Temple Mount measured exactly 500 cubits by 500 cubits, which is approximately 1,000 feet by 1,000 feet. The great inner building of the temple was called the Heichal. It housed the portico, within it the sanctuary, and within it the Holy of Holies. The Heichal at its base stood 44 feet above the rest of the Temple Mount and rose to a height of 240 feet, equivalent to a modern-day 20-story building. The walls of the interior of the Heichal were lined with cedar wood and then overlaid with pure gold.
Water reached the temple from underground in Jerusalem and through aqueducts from as far away as Hebron, a distance of more than 30 miles. Cisterns, pipes, and pools stored the water under the Temple Mount. An intricate system of subterraneous halls and vaults, passages and tunnels, a veritable underground city, was hewn out of the solid rock beneath the Temple Mount. The cavernous space between the ground above and possible graves beneath provided spiritual protection for the Jewish priests, who by scriptural law would become spiritually defiled in the presence of a corpse and temporarily forbidden to enter the temple.
Visitors to Israel today are astounded to learn that they are standing not at the foot of the Western Wall, but merely at the midpoint of its height.
Three times a day the people pray. Look with favor, Lord our God, upon your people Israel. Restore the service to your sanctuary, and accept with love and favor Israel's fire offerings and prayer. And at the precise moment the sun breaks over the horizon, the people praying the sunrise service step forward to recite the Amidah, the 18 benedictions that forms the central prayer of every Jew. Three times a year, throngs of joyous pilgrims converged on the Holy Temple like blood is drawn to the heart to be revitalized. And Jerusalem was swollen with joy as her far-flung children, the people of Israel, came home to her from every place in the land of Israel and from beyond its borders. They came with the first fruits they had harvested and with their offerings of thanksgiving. They came to offer the paschal sacrifice. They came to see God and to be seen by God in the place that he had chosen, in his holy house. They left everything they owned at home unattended, for God had assured them of his protection. They came to sing and dance and bow their heads in awe before the majesty of the King of the universe.
Throughout the festivals, they witnessed open miracles, and when they returned to their homes, they took with them new faith, new inspiration. From Jerusalem, they went forth to every village and city of the land, as blood surges forth from the heart to all the organs of the body, renewed and revitalized. But how did it happen? What was there about the temple that brought such inspiration to the people, that continues to inspire their prayers till this very day, more than 1900 years after it was destroyed?
The ultimate focal point of the Holy Temple was contained within the Holy of Holies, the innermost part of the sanctuary. This room was built over the Even Hashatiyah, the foundation stone, the primordial point from which God created the world. Atop the foundation stone in the first temple rested the Holy Ark of the Covenant. And within the Holy Ark lay the 2 tablets of the Covenant, engraved with the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, 2 enormous cubes of purest sapphire. Their miraculous letters, engraved through from one side to the other, were written by the finger of God atop Mount Sinai. Upon the covering of the ark stood the 2 cherubim, hammered out of a single ingot of gold, according to the commandment of God. And from between the cherubim, God spoke from his place on high. The very presence of the ark was a constant miracle in the Holy of Holies. The width of this small room was 20 cubits. The Ark of the Covenant measured 2.5 cubits from end to end. Yet, when they measured from either side of the ark to the nearest wall of the Holy of Holies, both distances measured 10 cubits. The 2 measurements added up to 20 cubits. This meant that the Holy Ark itself occupied no space on earth. And from above this place, which occupied no place in the world, the voice of God was heard from his place above. Then, through the gift of prophecy, King Josiah foresaw the destruction of the first temple 35 years before it came. He ordered all the priceless treasures of the Holy of Holies to be put in hiding in a secret vault below the temple. All that stood in the Holy of Holies thereafter, even throughout the 420 years of the Second Temple, was the foundation stone itself.
Just outside the richly woven curtain of the Holy of Holies in the sanctuary, the high priest performed the daily temple service. Twice daily he filled the temple precincts with the fragrance of spices burnt on the golden incense altar. Each day he cleaned and kindled the 7 oil lamps of the magnificent menorah, the candelabra of solid gold. Just beyond, the windows of the sanctuary, wider within and narrower outside, symbolized the fact that the world received its light from the temple, not the temple from the world. And in the sanctuary there were continuous miracles. The 12 loaves upon the showbread table remained fresh throughout the week until they were replaced each Sabbath. And the flames of the 3 branches on either side of the menorah all turned toward the center branch, which symbolized the Shekhinah, the divine presence.
One of the most dramatic moments in the Holy Temple each year came during the awesome Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. For when the temple stood, the entire Yom Kippur service was performed by one man, the high priest. On this holiest day of the year, the holiest man in the world entered the holiest place in the world and pronounced the awesome name of God.
Before entering the most holy place, the high priest was addressed by the eldest priest with words of warning.
Consider in whose presence you are about to enter. Remember that you are about to come before the Supreme King, who sits on a throne of justice and destroys all evil.
He was then handed a censer full of finely ground incense. He, stirred by feelings of reverence, he entered the Holy of Holies. When he reached the Ark of the Covenant, he set down the firepan between its staves. In the second temple, he set it upon the foundation stone. He emptied all of the incense from the ladle into his hands, then placed it on the glowing coals of the firepan until the Holy of Holies became filled with smoke. When he emerged from within the curtain, he offered a brief prayer.
When atonement had been granted to the people, a thread of crimson wool that had been placed in the sanctuary miraculously turned white. The people who had been anxiously awaiting this moment now rejoiced.
Fortunate is the eye that saw all this when the sanctuary stood on its foundation.
But when the ear hears of it, our soul grieves. Fortunate is the eye that saw the house of the living God. But when the ear hears of it, our soul grieves. And the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, If any man among you would bring an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering from the cattle, from the herd, and from the flock.
In the courtyard that lay before the Heichal stood the great altar. From the soft earth here, God formed the body of the first man, Adam. And it was here that Noah came from Mount Ararat to offer sacrifices of thanksgiving to God after the floodwaters had subsided.
But it was the binding of Isaac on precisely this same spot that is the inspirational source of the sacrificial altar. For it was here that God tested the faith of Abraham by commanding him to bring his son Isaac upon an altar. And then, when Abraham had demonstrated that he was prepared to surrender even his beloved son in humble obedience to God, a ram miraculously appeared, and Abraham was commanded to offer it as a substitute for his son Isaac. In the merit of Abraham, his children throughout the ages, by scriptural command, were permitted to offer animal sacrifices to God as atonement for sins, as free will offerings, and in order to become spiritually elevated.
The sacrifice could be large or small animals, or pigeons, or doves, or if the person had limited means, even a modest gift of fine food.
Not sure what happened to the video, but perhaps we should, if they get the video on again, you could watch the rest of it. Otherwise, watching that is, as the video said, and as we say in the Avodah on
I'm sorry, the video's gone down here. Rabbi Karlebach, I think, just take over here.
Okay. So as we said, anyone who wants to watch the full video, by the way, as you saw, it's on Chabad.org, Waking the Dawn or something. On Yom Kippur, we say about that in the Avodah, at the end of the Avodah, we say that this is what they were privileged to see. And sadly, we are not today, but we yearn after it. Tisha B'AV, as we know, started with the Chet HaMeraglim, when the scouts came back and they told that terrible report. And we are told that Klal Yisrael began crying that night. And Hashem said to the Jewish people, "You are crying for nothing. I will give you some reason to cry for." And Tisha B'Av became known as Bechia L'Doros, crying for future generations. We know that the two Batei Mikdash, the first Beis Hamikdash, was destroyed on Tisha B'Av, and 490 years later, the second Beis Hamikdash, 70 years of the Golus Bayis Rishon, and then the second Beis Hamikdash stood for 420 years, and it was also remarkably destroyed on Tisha B'Av. And so too, 52 years later or so, the Bar Kochba led a rebellion with Rabbi Akiva at his side, and Beitar was the last stronghold, and that was also destroyed on Tisha B'Av. And on Tisha B'Av, we read, one of the kinnis is also based on the Eila Eskera, which we read on Yom Kippur, which talks about the 10 different martyrs that were killed by Hadrian. Although we talk about the 10 martyrs, some of them lived in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, and some of them were actually killed after the Beis Hamikdash. But as the poem tells us, the Eila Eskra, that Hadrian, the Caesar, came to Klal Yisrael and said, "What is the sin that the Torah says for kidnapping someone and selling them?" And the answer was death. And he said, "Well, the 10 brothers sold Yosef, and I can't think of 10 greater people than you to carry out that punishment." According to Kabbalah, the 10 martyrs actually were the Gilgul, the reincarnation of the 10 brothers. And we know about the terrible deaths that occurred at that time with Rabbi Akiva being skinned alive, and at that time he was smiling. And his students asked him, "How can you smile at this time?" And he said, ever since he's begun saying the Shema, it says, "B'chol me'odecha," with all your might. And that means, "Afilu noiteles nafshecha," even if God takes your soul in the most painful way, you must still love God. That's what I've been saying. It's all good in theory. How do I know if I'll feel that way in practice? And now that I see that I feel this way in practice, shouldn't I smile? We read in the Kinnis many other tragedies that happened in Tisha B'Av, including total communities being decimated in the times of the Crusaders in Germany, in France, and in many other places where they were totally, the communities were totally destroyed. And these are all some of the things that we think about in Tisha B'Av. Today, we are sitting in a very strange Tisha B'Av. Normally, we're all together in shul, and there is some type of ischabrus. We're all alone at home, and we will be saying Eicha shortly for those who haven't. And we are stricken with COVID that's going around. South Africa itself is going through a very, very difficult time with hopefully the aftermath of all the riots and looting. And as Rabbi Masinta started, we are certainly crying out for Mashiach. But I'd like to share with you a Hasidic story. There was the holy Triska Magid. He was a Chernobyler Einikel. He was the son, Rab Nochem Chernobyler, the Meir Einayim started the Chernobyl dynasty. He was a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov. He had a son called Rab Mordechai Chernobyler, and the Triska Magid was his son as well. The Triska Magid was known that he hardly ever ate, just enough to survive, and he hardly ever slept. And one day he met Reb Baruch Mezhebush, the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. And the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov said, "What kind of a service of God is this, where you hardly eat and you hardly sleep? Why are you doing that?" So he said, "I'll tell you, when it comes to eating, I'm so tired because I haven't slept that I can't eat. And when it comes to sleeping, I'm so hungry because I haven't eaten that I can't fall asleep." So Reb Baruch Mezhebush grabbed him by his lapels and he said, "I have the koyach to tear you out of this world and the next world. Stop your games and tell me what the real reason is." So the Triska Magid says, "Okay, if that's the case, I'll have to tell you. One day, early in the morning, my father, who to me was Tzaddik Yesod Eilam, the Tzaddik of the world, Reb Mordechai Chernobyler, calls me and he says, we're going on a trip, which was very surprising to me because we never, ever went anywhere before davening. But this time we did. He saddled up the coach and we went into the woods and came to a hut. And as I say, to me, my father looked like the greatest angel I knew. A man walked out and suddenly I saw someone who looked even more saintly than my father himself. He greeted my father and they went into this house together. My father instructed me to remain in the carriage. They were there for a long time. When they came out, the saintly man turned to my father and said, "That's what you feel?" He said, "I'm sad to say, but yes." And they bid each other shalom. And my father got onto the carriage, very deep in thought. And I asked my father, what was that all about? Who was that? And he said to me, this is the Mashiach of our generation. And we had a long talk, and he asked me, Tzipiso Yeshua, are the Jewish people truly awaiting my coming? And I had to answer him that despite all this tzaras, and despite all the crying avad Mosai, and despite all the crying, we want Mashiach now, it hasn't really entered where it has to. So the Triska Magid turns to the Baruch Mezhebush, and he says, let me ask you something. If you met Mashiach, and you know that the only reason he's not revealed yet is because we're not truly waiting for him. As the Rebbe said in that famous Sicha, wollt gewen 10 Yidden, 10 earnest Jews who are really waiting for Mashiach in a proper manner, in the true manner, and that's why he hasn't come. Would you be able to eat or sleep again? I was told a story, actually, heard by my cousin Shlomo that he was in Germany in his youth when Tisha B'AV. Tisha B'AV in Germany is very late at night. And on the night of Tisha B'AV, he woke up as a little child and he saw his parents sitting on the floor in ashes crying. And he asked them, "Why are you sitting on the floor? Why are you crying like this?" And they explained to him that it is Tisha B'AV. And we are mourning the destruction, the Churban Abayis, the destruction of our holy temples, the destruction of Shchinta B'Gelusa, the fact that the Almighty is not revealed with us, and so many other tragedies. And I cried with them. He says the next night, he woke up in the middle of the night. He saw them eating at their table, sitting comfortably, laughing, eating. He began dancing. They said to him, "Why are you dancing?" He says, "Well, I imagine that if you are carrying on your life and now you're eating and sitting at the table, it must be that the source of the Churban, the source of all the tragedy has gone, and now we can rejoice." And they explained to him that sadly, that's not the way it is. Maybe this story of the Triska Magid is saying that this Tisha B'AV, as we mourn Churban, we mourn the destruction of so many holy things. Since the Churban Abayis, look how many destructions the Jewish people have gone through, be it the Inquisitions, be it the Crusaders, be it the Holocausts, be it even the Intifadas and the things that are going on Klal Yisrael. But the question should be to all of us, are we able to carry on our lives and just say that this is a reserved time to think about Mashiach, to see what we can do to bring him, and once the Tisha B'AV is over, we just carry on going back to our lives. This is certainly not what the Rebbe wanted. And as Rabbi Hecht said, we are told that it is with Avas Chinam that we will be able to have the Beis HaMikdash rebuilt to Yirtzeh Hashem. This Avas Chinam, the Baal Shem Tov taught us that a neshama can come down into this world and live 70, 80 years. And its whole purpose is to do one person a favor. A physical one, how much more so a spiritual one. And this is all part of the Avas Chinam, to be there for one another, to care for one another, and not just to go back to what you'd call normality. Hopefully, Yirtzeh Hashem, Mashiach is coming, but we have learned from this situation of COVID that there's no such thing anymore as normality. I don't know if anyone knows what normal should be, but for a Jew, normal should be, as the Rebbe told us, crying ad Mosai with a sincerity, with an emes, and truly beseeching Hashem, Shen Genuk. And as Rabbi Hecht mentioned, even Napoleon could see that if we call a misabel, anybody who mourns sincerely for Yerushalayim, for the Beis HaMikdash, for all the calamities, Roya will see the rebuilding. Let us see it speedily in our day. And I wish everybody more a meaningful fast than anything else. Take the next 25 hours, make it meaningful to yourself, to your family, and take it with you. And let us hope that as we are taught, we will see the Moshiach and the Beis HaMikdash Hashlishi speedily. And We will go into Eicha shortly. Rabbi Ms.
Alex, are you doing start Eicha? Rabbi Kalabach, I think you're on mute.
So you didn't hear anything yet?
Nothing. Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Let's start Eicha again.
Okay. Eicha Yoshva Vadod. Hoi Rabosio Am Hoiso Kalmono. Rabosi Bagoyim. Sorosi Bamdino Ais Hoiso Lomas. Bochoi Sivke Balayla. Vidimaso Alecheyo. Ein Lomenache Mikoloya Veho. Kol roi eha bagduvo ha yula liavim. Golsa Yehuda mi'ayni umei reiv avoida. Hi ashvavagoyim loy matza monoyach. Kol roi tfeisigu bein hamitzorim. Darche Tziohuin avelois. Mibli bo emoyeit kol sheareho shaimein koyaneho nenochim b'sulaisenu gois v'himarlo ayutzareho l'roish ayveho shalu ki arinoi hoigal reif pishoeho oilaleho Holchushvi lifnei tzor vayetze mi basiyoin kol hadora hayu soreha kayolim loy matzumira vayelchu v'loy koyach lifnei roidev zochra Yerushalayim yemei onya umrudeha kel machamudeha Asher hayu mimekedem bin foel amo biahatzor v'ein oizer lo ra'u hatzarim sochaku amishpatecha chet chato a Yerushalayim al kein l'nida hayasa kol mechabdeha silu akira'u eravosa Gam hi nencha v'toshov ochar tumasaha bishuleha lo hayzachra acharisa v'teiret ploim ein menachim lo ri'ei adinoi es onyi ki higdil oyev yodai poras Zohar alcohol machmadeha kiroaso goyim bo migdosho asher tziviso lo yavoyu bakoloch kol amon enochim mevakshim lechem nosnu machmadehem biyoichel shiv nofesh re'ei adonoi vihabito Ki hayisu yizoy leila lo yaleichem kolevre derech habitu uriu im yesh machoiv kemachoivi asher oileli asher hago adinoi biyoim charoin apohoi mimoroim Sholach eish batz moisai vayerdeno poras reshes liraglai hashiveni ochar nesonani shoymeimo kol hayoim dovo nishkad El pisha ahai biodoi, yistorgu olu, al tzavari hichshil koichi, nosanani adoinoi, bidei lo yuchalkum. Sila kolabirai adinoi birkibi, kora olai moye lishpor bachurai. Gastorach adinoi livsulas bas Yehudo al ehle ani voichia ehini yordamoyim kirochak mimeni menachei meishiv nafshi hayuvonai shoymei min ki govar oyev Peres Otziyohuin Biodeho Ein Menachem Lo Tzivo Adinoi Liakev Svivov Tzorov Hoiso Yerushalayim Linida Beinehem Tzadiku Adonoi Kifihu Morisi Shimuno kol ha'amim Ur'u machoivi Besuloi sai v'churai Holchu v'shevi Koros limavai Heimorimuni Koi hanai uskenai Ba'ir gava'um Ki vikshu oichel lomoi V'yoshivu es nafshom Riei adinoi kitzali mei chamar moru nepach libi bikirbi ki moroi morisi michut shikloch erev babayis kamoves shame ki nenocho oni Ein menachem li kol oivai shamurosi sosu Ki ato osisom. Hevei soyem karosovi yuchamoini. Tovoi kol rosom lefonecha vo'ele lomoi. Kasher oilaltoli al kopishooi. Ki rabois anchoisai v'libi davoi. Eicha. Yoiv bapoi adinoi espassioin, hishlich mishamayim eretz tiferes Yisroel, veloi zochar hadoim raglov b'yom apoi, bila adinoi loi chomal. Eis kol neis Yaakov horas bevrosoi, mivtzerei vas Yehuda higia lo oretz, Chileo mamlocho v'soreho, Godaha bechoriyav, Kel keren Yisrael, Heishiv ochor, Yeminoi mipnei oyev, Vayiva b'Yaakov keishlohovo, ochlo soviv, Dorach kashtoi ki oyev, Nitzav yeminoi kitzor, Vayarei kol machamadei oyim. Bi oyel basioin, Shofach koeish chamosoi, Oyadinoi ki oyev bila Yisroel, Bila kal armenoi seho, Shicheis mivtzorov, Vayerev bevas Yudo, Taniyo vaniyo, Vayachmos kagan sukoi, Shicheis moyadoi. Shikach harinoi betzioin moyed v'shabos, Vayinatz b'zamapoi melech v'choyein. So nacharinoi mizivchoi miyer migdoshoi, Hiskir b'yad oyev, Choymoi samenoi soyo. Kel, Nosnu v'veis harinoi ki oy meyed. Choshavarinoy lahashchis choymas basiyoin notokoov loy heishiv yodoy mi baleya vayevel cheil v'choyme yachtov umlolu tovu v'eret shioyereho ibeit Vishibe bricheha, Malka v'soreha b'goyim ein toira, Gam nevi'eha, Loi motzu chazoin meyadinoi, Yesh v'loret zid muziknei vasiyoin, Elu afor al roishoam, Chogru sakim, Hoyridu le'eretz roishon, Bisuloi shirushalayim. Kolubad moi seinai chamamoru meya nishbach lo oretz kevedi al shever basami biotei v'oileil v'yoinek b'rachoi v'hois kiuyo limoi som yoimru aye dogon v'yoyom bisatvam kecholol b'choi v'isir bishtapeich navshom el chei kimoisom Mo aideich, mo adam eloch, haba shirushalayim, mo ashveloch vanachameich, bisulas basit Zion, ki godel kayom, shivreich mir poloch, neviach, chazuloch shoves sofel, V'lo gilu al avoineich, lo shiv shvuseich, vayechezu loach, masoi shov umaduchim, shavko alayich kapayim koloi vrederech, sharku vayoniu roishom, al ba'as Yerushalayim, hazohoi so'ir, Sheyoimru klilas yoifi mosois l'chol haaretz. Potzu alayich pihem koloi vayich sharku vayacharku shein amru b'la'uni ach ze hayoim shekivinu motzonu ro'inu oso adinoi asher zamom Bitzem rosoi ashetziva mimei kedem, horaz v'loi chamo. Vayisamach olayich oyev, heilim keren tzoryoyich. Tzoak libam el adoi enoi, choymas ba'asiyoin. Oridi kanach al dimo yemam v'laylo, al titni fugas loach, al tidoim bas einayich, kumiroini balaylo, leroish ashmureis, shivchi kamayim libeich, noichach pnei adoi noi, si Elohov kapayich, Al nefesh oilolayich, oatufim berov, roish kol chutzois, reyei adinoi vihabito, lemi oilal tokoi, im teichal nonoshim, puyam oilei tipuchim, im yehorei, bimigdash adoinoi, kohen venovi, shavchul haaretz chutzois nar v'zokein, Besuloi sayu vachurai noflu vechorev. Horakto biyoim apecho, tovachto loi chamolto. Tikro, ki yoim meyed megurai misoviv. Veloi hoyo, biyoim afadinoi, polit vesorid. Asher tipachti v'ribisi, oi vichilom. Ani hagevero oni b'shevet evrosoi, oisino hag, vayoylach oishech v'loi or, ach biyoshuv, yafoich yodoi kol hayoim, bila v'sori v'oiri shiba atzmoisai, bono olai, Vayakev roishus lo b'machak shakim hoishivani kimesei olam godar badi v'lo yetzei hichbid nechoshti gam ki ezak vashaveya Sosam sfilosi. Godad rochai megozis nesivoisai ivo. Dev erev huli ari b'mistorim. Trochai soirer. Vayifashcheni shom somani shoimein. Dorach koishe vayatziveni kimatoro lachetz. Hevi bichol yoisai b'nei ashpasoi. Oyisi sechoi klechol ami neginosom kol hayoim. Hisbi ani vamroidim hirvani lano. Vayadres bechotzo shoshinoi. Ich bis shani bo efer. Vatiznach mishalom nafshi. Noshi sitoiva. Voimar ovad nitzchi. Visoy chalti miyadinoi. Zecher onim rudi lanovoroish. Zochor tizkor visosuach olai nafshi. Zois oshiva libi al kein oichil. Chazdei adonoi kiloi somnu. Kiloi chalu rachamov. Chadoshim lapkorim rabo emunosecho. Chelki adinoi omron nafshi al kein oichiloi. Tov adinoi lekoivov linefesh tidrishenu. Tov yochil vidumam lishuas adinoi. Tov lagever ki Yisrael benurov. Yeshev bodod v'yidoim ki notol olov. Yitem biofor pihu ula yesh tikvo. Yitem lemakehu lech yisba becherpo. Ki lo yiznach li'olam adinoi. Ki im hoigo v'rikcham krev chasodov. Ki lo ino milibi vayega b'nei ish. Ledakei tachas raglov kel asirei oretz. Latois mishpat gover. Neged pnei elyoin, lavei sodom brivoi, adonoi loi ro'o, mise omar vatehi, adonoi litzivo, mipi elyoin loi seitze horois vatev, ma yisanein o yisoinein odoam choi, Gever al chatoov, nach besod rochenu v'nach geiro v'noshuvo ad adinoi, nisalvavenu el kapoim el bashamoyim, nachnu foshanu morinu, ato loi solachto, zakeiso va'afatir defeinu, horakto loi chamolto. Sakesha banon loch mi avor tfilo schi umo istisimeni bekerev hoamim potzualeinu pihem koloivenu Pachad v'fachas hoyolanu hasheis v'shover palge mayim tered eini al shever basami eini nigro v'loisid me bien hafugois ad yashki v'yere adinoi mishomoyim eini oilelon nafshi mikol benoi sivi Tzoitzoduni katzipor oivai chinom. Tzom tzuvabor chayoy vayadu even bi. Tzofumayim al roishi omarti nigro zoti. Korosi shimcho adinoi mibor tachti yois. Koili shamato al taleim oznecho. L'rav chosi l'shavosi, korafto b'yom ekro eko, omarto al tiro, rafto adoino, rivei navshi gol techoyoi, Ro'iso Adinoi Avososi Shofto Mishpoti. Ro'iso Kol Nikmosam Kol Machshavaisom Li. Shomato Cheposam Adoyenoi Kol Machshavaisom Olai. Sivsei Kol Mavegyoinam Olai Kol Ayoim. Shiftom Vekimosom Habito Ani Manginosom. Toshiv lohem gemul Adonai kimasei yedehem. Titen lohem megina slave taloscho lohem. Tidoiv bi'af ishashmidem mitach ashmei Adonai. Eicho hoyu am zohov yishna kesem hatoiv. Tishtapeichno avnei kodesh beroish kol chutzois b'nei tzioin hayikorim hamesuloim bapos eichon echshavu l'nivlei cheres maaseh yedei yotzer gam tanim chol tzushad einiku gireihen basami liachzor Kayoneim bamidbar, dovak l'shonyoinei, kel chitzoi batzomo, oilolim shualu lechem, poireis en lohem, ha'eichlim l'madanim no shamu bachutzois, ha'emunim alei soila chipku ashpatois. ויגדל אבוין בסמים, מיכתה סדוים, ההפוכה כמוי רוגע ולא יחלו ויודעים, זעקו נזיריה משלג, צחו מחלוב, אדמו עצם מפנינים, ספיר גזרוסם, חושך משחור תורם, לא נקרו בחוצויס, צופרוי דום על עצמם, יובש או יחוויץ. טובים היו חללי חרב, מחללי רעב, שהם יעזובו מדוכרים, מתנובוי סודוי, ידי נשים רחמניויס, Bishlu Yaldehem, Hayu Levaray Slomoy, Bishever Basami, Kilo Adinoi Eschamosoi, Shofar Harinapoi, Vayetzes Eish Bitzioin, Vatoichal Yesoidoiseho. Loi he'eminu malchei eretz, v'chol yeshvei sevel. Ki yavoi tzar ve'oyev, bisharei Yerushalayim. Gel mechatois neviyeho, avoino lois koyhaneho. Hashevchim bikirbo, dam tzadikim. No uivrim bachutzois, negoyalu badom. Below yuchlu yigu bevushoyhem. Sarutamei, karu lamohoi. Suru altigau, kinotsu gamnau. Amru bagoyim lo yosifu lagur. Pnei adinoi chilkom, lo yosif labitom. Pnei choyhanim lo nosau, uskenim lo chonanu. Oideinu tichleno einenu, el ezroseinu hovel. Bitzipi oseinu tzipinu, el goy lo yoshia. Tzodu tzodeinu, mileches bechoivoseinu. Korav kitzeinu, molu yomeinu, kivo kitzeinu. Galim hayu reitfeinu, minishrei shomayim. El heharim delokunu, bamidbar avulanu. Ruach hapeinu, Mashiach adinoi, nilchom, nilkad b'shchisoisom. Asher amarnu b'tziloi nichye v'agoyim. Sisi v'simchi bas Edoim, Yoisheves beretz utz, Gam olayich tavor koos, Tishkiri v'sisori, Tam avoinech bas Zion, Lo yoisiv lig lo seich, Bo kad avoinech bas Edoim, Gilo al chotoi sayich, Zecher Adinoi me'oyolonu habitorei escher poseinu nachaloseinu nefchol ezorim boteinu lenochrim Yisoimim hayinu ein ve'ein oavim oiseinu kalmonois meimenu bechesev shosinu eitzeinu b'chir yovoyu al tzavoreinu nedofnu yoganu loy hunachlanu Mitzrayim nosanu yod, Ashur lisboya lochem. Avoisenu chotu veloi ve'enom va'anachnu avonesehem sovonu. Avodim oshluvonu poirekim yodom binavshenu lo vilachmenu mipnei cherev hamidbar. Oireinu kisanu od nichmaru mipnei zalavo Yisrael. Noshim betziyoininu besulois boreyudo. Sorim biyodo omnislu b'neis kenim lo nedarum. Bachurim techoin osa'u norim boitz koshalu. Zekenim isha shavosu bachurim Miniginosom Shovas Misois Libenu Nepach Level Mecholeinu Noflo Ateres Roishenu Oinolo Kichotonu Aleze Oyodo Veli Benu Al Eile Choschuenenu Al Haretziyoin Sheshomeim Shualim Hilchuvoi Ato Adinoi Loilam Teishev Kisachol Davador Lomo Holonetzach Tishkochenu Tazveinu Leidech Yomim Hashivenu Adinoi Elecha V'noshuva Chadesh Yomeinu Kekedem Ki imo ois me ostan me oestonu kotzavto oleinu admiyoid Hashivenu adinoi elecha v'noshuva Chadesh Yomeinu Kekedem. Now we continue on with the rest of the Kinnis. You could find it also on Chabad.org. I'd just like to point out that Eicha is 5 chapters. Most of it follows the Aleph base, except for the last chapter. It was written by the prophet Yirmiyahu. And we are told that he actually wrote Eicha before the Churban. He wrote it as a prophecy before the destruction of the temple, because after that, he couldn't write anymore. Rabbi Mesinta, should we say good night? Because
Please, God, firstly to you, Rabbi Kolobach, and to you, Rabbi Hecht. Grace,
still on?
I think so. A big thank you. And if I'm not mistaken, Yirmiyahu, the prophet Jeremiah, was a reincarnation of King Solomon. So please, God, we should have the base of Mikdash, the temple rebuilt. I'm sorry about the errors at the beginning with the internet going down. But thank you. And please, God, everybody should have a light fast. Tomorrow afternoon at 4:30 is a special program. But we will send out WhatsApps for that. A light fast to everybody.
And you could finish the Kinnis on your own, I guess. Shkoyach.